Welcome to another episode of How I'm Building This, where we interview startup founders that are in the thick of building their businesses. We learn from their mistakes and get practical tips to overcoming challenges. Today we have Matt from uMed. Matt, how are you? Thanks so much for joining.
No, great to be here. Great day today. Yeah, nice and sunny here in Boston. So thank you ever so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining. Matt, before we jump into the business, would love to learn who's Matt, where did you grow up, and what really got you into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So a quick bit of background on me. So as you can tell by the accent, I'm not from Boston originally. So I was a physician back in the UK. So I was an anaesthetist, anesthesiologist back in the UK, practiced from sort of 2009 through till just after the pandemic, actually. And grew up on the kind of south coast of England, and throughout my kind of whole career as a practicing physician, I was always really interested in how to kind of create system change. And one of the slight frustrations I had was, clinical practice is fantastic. I was very fortunate and loved my practice, but it always felt like we were treating one patient at a time. And what was very clear is in order to kind of create that change at scale for patients, we need to think about how to change systems. And I think for me, one of the key elements with that was around research, because ultimately that's the basis of everything that we do in healthcare. It has to ultimately be evidence driven. And so sort of my underlying personal thesis was that if I could create a way in which we could affect the ability to do research much more effectively and at scale, that would have significant knock-on consequences for patients in the long term, as that drives changes in practice. And on the entrepreneurship side, I actually have I was a doctor in the British War Marines in the earlier part of my career, and I was in Norway for a sort of protracted period of time. And on the way out there, I picked up a Inc. magazine, which was startup kind of business magazine. And I sort of had time, and so I was reading it through, and I got quite inspired actually by some of those entrepreneur stories, and it kind of got me thinking maybe there's a way to think about this outside of me doing research directly, or perhaps trying to drive some of the system change from the inside. Maybe I could think about creating a business and drive it from the outside. So that's kind of where it all started, and built from there.
That's awesome. So was there like a pivotal moment, as you were, growing up, or as you were working, where in which you were like, you know what, I need to get into entrepreneurship. I have to build this. There's just something that's just a much bigger need than what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say that there was a sort of road to Damascus bathtub moment, or whatever you call it, where it all kind of coalesced in one go. I think the reality is that it is a bit of a journey, and I think I sort of had these sort of frustrations, and I was seeing some of my colleagues, my sort of senior colleagues, sort of frustrated about their ability to affect change, or lack of ability to affect change. And then, as I say, I sort of started reading more and kind of understanding more about entrepreneurship. And at the time, it was quite in those sort of late 2010s, it was quite there was a bit more capital around.
Yep.
There was some good incentive programs in the UK to support angel investors. And so through that, I was able to kind of start putting some ideas in front of some angel investors, which allowed me to kind of formulate it. And then over time, as with probably most startups that I've seen, the original vision has not fundamentally changed, but certainly the way in which I probably articulate what we do now is different to how I pitched it in the early days. But the underlying kind of thesis has been the same. And ultimately for me, because I was involved in research throughout my career and watching research happening, and the two really sort of key things struck me. So one was that the vast majority of patients out there are not offered research at all. So the healthcare providers that serve them are just not set up to systematically and scalably offer research opportunities. It's done in still a surprisingly haphazard way. And the second part that sort of really struck me is that patients are generally offered the opportunity to be part of a traditional clinical trial, which are incredibly important, or nothing at all. And the traditional clinical trials often have very strict criteria around what patients can and can't be in the study, which is very important, but it excludes the vast majority of the population, even if they're offered it, from being part of that study. So I also started to imagine, is there a way that we can build living cohorts of patients which want to be able to participate in research, but not necessarily be part of an interventional clinical trial, a traditional trial. And through that, perhaps there was an exciting way for us to really kind of rethink how research is executed and how we can involve a much broader proportion of the population in research that's going to impact patients in the long term.
Sure. That's fair. Awesome. Um, Man, hiring is by far the most critical job of a CEO. And especially at your stage, you're at Series A, etc. When it comes to hiring, what is your North Star that you look for beyond just a beautifully formatted and well said resume?
Yeah, one of my humble observation about this is that I've almost sort of to a degree stopped looking too much into those resumes, because I think I've made some mistakes where I've hired somebody based on a great CV in terms of they seem to have all of the relevant experience. But it's something that's kind of really struck me. The North Star for me is this sort of independence and proactivity and the ability. And this is a huge oversimplification, but I think you could put people in two camps. There's people that can complete tasks, so you can give them a kind of clear set of direction and they can execute it very well. And then there's another group of people who you can give a problem to, and they will just work out how to solve it. And I think what I've learned through this is you can get some brilliant executors, but actually what you need is a force multiplier for you as a CEO. And I've certainly seen, as the companies started to continue to grow, there becomes a very key point where I cannot no longer be the problem solver. I can't be that person that's in all of the meetings, and actually I become a huge rate determining step and barrier to growth by being that individual that's trying to hold all of these things together. And actually what you need is that top tier of leadership, those sort of lieutenants, and you need them to be able to have independent problem solving capability. And I've almost started to think about, and we've started doing this, is when we're hiring, actually giving people tasks that are in somewhat completely tangential to actually their planned job role. And because so much of a startup isn't just you can create a nice job description, but there's a whole set of stuff that you don't even know is going to happen that you need to solve for. And it's really interesting to see how people respond to that, because there's some people that just have that sense of independence where they don't see it, they just work it out. Like they just work out how to solve these problems. And that, if that was a sort of single North Star, I think that would be what I would look for.
That's fair. So are there any, uncoachable traits that you prioritize?
I think it's one is a sort of mindset piece of just how you go about your work. And I think there are some people that when they join and I don't think it's just a startup, but any company, do see it as more than a job. They see it as a responsibility to the business and to their co-workers. And I've noticed that, in terms of just their own responsiveness, like we work across different time zones, and therefore there are times when you do just need to get on a call at 9 o'clock at night or 5 o'clock in the morning, and there are some people that do that without question, and it's not, I don't even have to ask them to do it; they just turn up, and that's clearly not a sustainable thing. It's not part of the culture that I necessarily want to kind of build in the long term. But there's as a small organisation that's trying to grow quickly, if you need to be on a call at 5 a.m., I shouldn't have to ask you to do it. You should yourself work out that that's important for you to be there. So I think that's a sort of an underlying sort of personality trait, really. Are you that sort of person that will just do what you need to in order to be able to achieve for your business and your colleagues? I don't think you can coach that. I think the other uncoachable piece is this piece around proactive problem solving.
Okay.
We've had certain employees who are absolutely excellent with inside the sort of domain of tasks that they're familiar with. Put them outside of that, and despite what I think is reasonably good coaching from myself or other members of the team, they're just, you still have to sort of spoon feed some of those answers to them. And I don't think that's particularly coachable. I think I think, one of the things that I found recently with AI and ChatGPT is, I mean, it is an incredible tool to help you problem solve some of these sort of unexpected issues that are coming up. And what I found amazing is that there's a certain group of people that really embrace that and will work out how to use it. As it's not the solution to everything, but it is an amazing tool to help you address problems that perhaps you don't understand or haven't foreseen. And there's some people that you kind of literally need to be like, this is how you use this. This is the type of things it can do. And there's other people that just kind of work it out and come back with these incredible outputs based on a utilization of these new tools.
That's fair. So Matt, during your like interview process, how do you sort of figure out whether the people that you're hiring are the ones who will get it done no matter what?
It's, being honest, I don't know the full answer to that. I think if I'm being really honest, I think the other part I think that's really challenging within a startup is when you've got a bigger organization and you've got we do have people supporting HR, and that's fantastic, and people, and they're doing a fantastic job. But in a big organization, you have a very robust kind of evidence-driven interview process, and that requires a huge amount of work to do really well. And it's trying to get that balance between we need to hire people, and we need to make decisions versus sort of lengthy and complex sort of interview structures. I do think, some of the work that we've done, one of our investors has supported us quite a lot on this, having that matrix of the key attributes and trying to objectively mark against those, I think it is a really strong baseline. But I do think that task element, I think, is one of the single easiest and quickest things you can do to understand how people are going to respond in their future job. So you can kind of do lots of interview questions, but people can be very good at giving good answers to good interview questions. I think giving them a fairly broad, intentionally kind of broad and undirected task, and just seeing how they respond to that, I think speaks volumes about what they're going to be able to do in the business in the future. But I admit I don't think we've got it 100% right, and I think it's one of the single hardest things you said to do as a startup, and we've made mistakes in the past. And there's also this real sort of challenge when you're early on, you're trying to attract top talent. But it's hard to do that because, why would a really amazing individual come and join something so high risk? And obviously that's, a lot of that's my job to try to be that kind of inspiring voice and show what the vision is. But you're also trying to balance, if you have a very onerous interview process where you're asking an awful lot of the candidates, is that really going to kind of put off some of those people who ultimately could walk into a whole bunch of other roles that are probably better paying, and probably have more security than we're offering them. So there's an interesting, I think, friction there, which starts to go away a bit as you get more funding and
I see that.
more track record.
I see that for sure, man. Awesome. Let's jump into the business. On your website, you say access patients, build evidence, change lives. I honestly love that, but I'd love to learn from you. What problem are you solving, and for whom?
Yeah, so effectively, we're solving a couple of problems, but the primary problem we're solving for our customers is getting access to patients to support research is incredibly difficult. And at the baseline, we're providing the ability to access patients that otherwise wouldn't be offered research
Sure.
opportunities. And that can directly support trial recruitment and studies that are running. But what's even more exciting is that off the back of that, we're actually creating a really new model for how to be able to build data and evidence that can serve customers' needs outside of those traditional clinical trials. So data is now an intrinsic part, and high quality data is now an intrinsic part of how drugs get to market. And ultimately, we're solving the problem of being able to provide rapid, high quality data to those life science organizations, whether they be academic or commercial, to be able to develop new therapies quicker and get them into market.
That's fair. So how you're getting this data, that's one side of it. And then the second side of it, when it comes to all the businesses that you're selling to, how are they finding out about you?
So, yeah, and it's that's, I think, our other sort of ongoing kind of challenges. I think you've got, and actually one of our team put this really well, is that our trial recruitment product, if you like, is actually relatively easy to sell. I'm simplifying it a bit, but it's because it's quite easy. We know what clinical trials are running. We
Sure.
kind of know who those people are that need those patients, and we can target and engage them through various different channels and the pitch is quite simple, right? You need patients. We've got access to patients, and it's quite simple. The challenge is when we're providing this somewhat, much more comprehensive and complex, but also very exciting products around providing high quality consented patient data. It's a much more nuanced consultative sell, and ultimately, it's very hard to win business with a new innovative product from a vendor that those big pharma companies have probably never heard of. So there's a few ways. I mean, interestingly, it's something we're still sort of optimizing in terms
Sure.
of what are those best channels. I think there's a lot of kind of pressure early on in startup world to kind of default to this sort of well-established model of business development, which is you get a great sales team, and you have a lead gen person, and you have a great BDM, and then you do a few conferences, and that does work, and you can start raising awareness. My personal view is I think there's a much more modern and scalable way to approach this, which is leveraging a lot of the tools out there. Cold outreach, I don't think works in our sector particularly well, because
Okay.
you're doing cold outreach B2B, generally to relatively senior people that are getting bombarded with messages. It does work, but I think, again, it's very hard to go from a point zero to a substantial contract with somebody who doesn't know who we are and has never heard of
Sure.
us through cold outreach. So ultimately for us, I think it's about relationships, and we've seen this work incredibly well, where for us, the primary way, if you look at where most of our deals have come from and where they're continuing to come from, they've actually come from leveraging trusted relationships. So
Well,
when we don't have that presence in the market, and people don't know who we are, well, let's work with people that do have that presence and trust in the market. And there's a couple of flavors for that. So, I mean, one is that we have a sort of ambassador program, as we call it, where there's people that have been in life science organizations and are customers for a long time and have held multiple different roles and have built that Rolodex. And they're there helping us drive introductions, advocating for us in a way that's much, the people that we're targeting will read the email from these people rather than just deleting it from their inbox. So that's a very good start. So that's one thing that's worked well, and there's some really great tools out there that can support that sort of ambassador program as well. There's a great tool called the Swarm
okay.
that we're using more, which allows you to be able to pull all of these people into a centralized platform. It pulls in their data from LinkedIn, and then you can kind of search through all of these different contacts,
Oh, wow.
and then you can kind of say, oh, hi Pratik, thanks for being part of our ambassador program. I can see that you're connected to Dave at
Yeah.
AstraZeneca.
Well, yeah.
Could you drop him this email?
Yeah.
And so it massively reduces the burden for them. and you can put them you can create an incentive program around that. So I think that works really well. The other is actually for us, which is probably quite specific to our sector, is academic key opinion leaders. So,
Okay.
behind, but it's still the underlying process of essentially leveraging trusted relationships. So academics, professors, senior academics are the sort of lifeblood that drives a lot of clinical research. So even if AstraZeneca, for example, is running a large program, they will engage with academics, the subject matter experts. So again, they trust those academics. They are the subject matter experts. So what we've done is build a program that allows those academics to benefit from working with us. We can provide them access to data and help support their own research. And in doing so, that helps us build those relationships with our ultimate customers. And I think once as we've seen, once we've developed that core relationship with a new customer, it's then actually very much easier to then land and expand out. And we can leverage the success of those initial programs to help us land and expand across some of these, very difficult to navigate. And I think that's the thing that's not unique to uMed in any way, or even our sector. But I think if you're driving B2B sales with small companies, you can get to the decision makers very quickly or navigate them. When you're talking about a multinational pharma company that's doing, tens or hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue, they're very complex organizations which you need to navigate. So it's really getting that Trojan horse, for want of a better word, and then building those relationships out from there.
That's absolutely fair. Wow. So you just moved from the UK to Boston about 2 years ago. Was that a very conscious decision to now grow the US market, or did you already have US based customers and you were just like, we just need to be there?
Yeah, so we did, and it's an interesting thing actually for us because there are our sort of customers, if you like, can be dichotomized into two groups. We've got the healthcare provider organizations that we
Sure.
work with that are partners that provide us access to these patients and work with us on these studies, and then we've got our paying life science customers who are the ones who are ultimately paying for the research. So we did have, and with the life science side, they're often actually global customers. So we contract, even though we might be running a study predominantly within, say a UK population, we could easily be contracting with a Spanish pharma company or a disease charity that's based in the US, for example. So in a way, it's not particularly useful to think of our customer base as being US or UK.
Okay,
What's more
that's fair.
important is where is our revenue coming from? Where are the studies and research projects that we're supporting? Where are the patients coming from that are the kind of lifeblood of those projects? And so for us, we did have some early access in the US. But I think for me, what was very interesting, it was post-pandemic. There was strong influence from our investors to say that there's a need for you to be in the US, and which I completely agreed with, and to build out that kind of US presence. And what's really interesting is, although a significant proportion of my meetings, I'm not going to New York or Boston or downtown Boston every day to have meetings. A lot of them are still on Zoom or remotely. The fact that I'm in the US, I've moved my family to the US, I think signals to those people, a US healthcare provider in Arkansas, that we're actually serious. We understand the US. There's nuances around the US and the US healthcare system and how it works and how research is done. And being here allows me to kind of understand that and sort of by osmosis absorb a lot of the context that's so important to then allow us to be able to grow in the US. But a lot of it as well is just, the number of times I've got on a call and they've said, they hear the accent and they assume that I'm based in the UK.
Yeah.
I'm based in Boston. And it does change the whole dynamic of the conversation. And it does also make it a lot easier. There's a lot of, there's a huge amount of conferences that are difficult potentially to justify going to, flying all the way from the UK for a 2-day conference.
Yeah.
Actually, when you're here, it's, a couple of $100 to fly to wherever you need to be, Chicago.
Yeah.
And so it makes it makes it easier to justify when you're trying to be, I'm trying to manage my time and manage our spend. is how do we do that? And so being here has made a big difference to that. And it does mean as well that when we do have client customer calls where they're based in the US, I was in Kansas City just last week,
Okay.
meeting a potential partner for us. So it makes it much easier to do that versus being in the UK.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. So, Matt, in a fairly competitive segment, how do you maintain your competitive edge?
So I think there's a couple of elements to that. I think one is coming back, like what's the true value that you're providing to customers? And it's I think there's some companies that have built really great businesses by just doing marketing and sales really well. And I take my hat off to them for doing that, even if they don't necessarily have a particularly compelling or differentiated product. And I think, and that's certainly one way to grow business. I think the other is just to really double down on what is it that's unique to uMed and why is that generating value for our customers. And I think if you can hone in on that, it allows you to maintain that consistent messaging. And I think the other piece is that as we've started to build more and more case studies effectively, showcasing how impactful this approach can be and this platform can be, that completely changes the way in which we end up discussing these opportunities with customers, because we no longer need to kind of say, oh, we can do this, and they're sort of looking at us going like, I don't know, this sounds a bit too good to be true. We can actually now say, look, here's a bunch of stuff that we've done with another company or with another customer. Look at what we're able to do. And normally, again, that started to really shorten the sales cycle and allow us to entrench ourselves as being the market leader in the specific elements of what we do.
That's fair. So, as you look at your business today, what are some of those like key metrics or trends that you are tracking that are helping you gauge the health? That are helping you gauge the health of your business.
Yeah, I think there's some really good ones. I mean, there's some ones that are unique to us in terms of our sort of patient acquisition and how quickly we can bring those on board, which are probably less relevant here. I think the interesting one for us, the metrics are, the most useful one is looking at, obviously, traditional ones like sales cycle time, how length of number of deal flows, how quickly they're moving through, all of that kind of stuff that you get from HubSpot. I think one of the most interesting things for us in order to drive that growth has been the metric of looking at where the leads have come from, not just in terms of number, but deal value. And it's quite interesting when we've looked at this in our space. We've had some relatively modest sized deals, and we can get a lot of those through things like cold outreach and, or through what I'd say are sort of traditional sales processes. If you look at the number of deals, it actually looks like cold outreach and, traditional marketing campaigns, if I can call it that, work quite well. But actually, if you then segment that by deal value and revenue, we see this enormous shift towards these advocacy-led channels to growth.
Wow.
So I think one of the things that we're now tracking really, really tightly is whenever we're putting effort into a specific growth channel, what is happening in terms of the traditional metrics of numbers of leads, but also how does that ultimately translate into revenue for the company? Because we've seen that not all of these sort of channels or approaches are equal in terms of value growth for the company in the long term.
Yeah, that's fair. Wow. So that said, though, right, when it comes to getting like your name out, especially from like a marketing perspective, what are some of the things that y'all are doing? Like, is there like a specific inbound funnel that y'all are building that is that's working, or like is there something else that y'all are doing that is essentially helping y'all get the name out?
Yeah, so I think for us there are a couple of channels. We sort of broke it down into sort of 4 ways in which we can generate leads. I think inbound for us, we do get inbound.
Okay.
And, as always with every startup, we're continuing to want to improve the website. And I think there's a lot that we want to kind of continue to do to allow us to drive that. I think, traditional kind of SEO, I don't think works in our sector
Okay.
at the stage that we're at, because people aren't sort of sitting there Googling, I need certain data, right? It's just not how customers buy products in our space. So I think those kind of traditional inbound channels, but most of it, the inbound is generally through referral from an existing customer.
Awesome.
So the inbound that we get will generally be through somebody dropping a line through our website saying, or saying, "Hey, look, I've been working with this other group. Would be great to kind of understand more about what you could do to support our team." And so that's great. So I think the inbound side is challenging to kind of scale independently. I think we do the normal stuff, the LinkedIn campaigns that does generate inbound, but I think the ROI on that is, again, when you look at it by deal value, is relatively limited.
Okay.
And that might be because we are still learning how to execute that well. But again, I think what we've seen is the better channels for us. So we've got what I call kind of traditional outreach campaigns and marketing through digital channels, and it does work to a certain extent. The second for us is this sort of ambassador program. The third is our key opinion leaders. You could kind of group those together as being essentially advocates, and that's how we're getting our name out primarily, is by building relationships with people that have influence and are well known within inside the industry, and letting them go and advocate for why what we're doing is really exciting and why a customer like AstraZeneca, if I keep using that example, should consider us. And so a lot of the inbound that we get is effectively through that. So they've been speaking to a particular, our advocates have been going out there, and often it's in a meeting and they're like, "Oh, we've got this challenge," and our key opinion leader will be like, "Well, have you thought about uMed for this?" Because they're really well set up for it. And then, often we'll then get an email either through that advocate or directly, wanting to kind of drive those leads. So I think, and the nice part about that sort of advocacy approach to scaling awareness is that it is possible to scale it very well and cost effectively, because you can create incentive structures that are driven by, either direct commission. So you're not having to shell out a lot of money up front to do that. And often these people are well connected with inside the industry. When we're selling something that's exciting and interesting and actually can help research. So there's not a huge rub. We're not asking them to go and, sell, we're not asking them to be an influencer and paying them to kind of, showcase a shiny new handbag or whatever it would be. This is stuff that people are interested in talking about. So we found that it works quite well to create a program whereby we're incentivizing people. If you help us get a deal, we'll compensate you for that. Very low burden for them. And therefore we can very quickly build a sort of network of people that are doing that. The academics, we incentivize slightly differently through supporting their own research and helping them drive their own, achieve their own goals. But the principle is the same, that if you can create this, where there's no kind of base OPEX to that, if you like, and actually you're driving that value on a reciprocity basis. If you help us, we can help you. That seems to work very well for us. And the other thing, I think that we're still, as we've now become a bit more mature and we've now got these case studies, we're now seeing that the kind of conference and event side is becoming a much more productive channel. I think I was very skeptical, for good reason, early on when I was going to conferences, because one, we didn't have the cash to kind of do it properly. We didn't have we didn't prepare for them properly, so we hadn't set up prior meetings. So you end up kind of wandering around these conferences trying to kind of speak to people, and they're like, why are you speaking to me? I don't know, I've never heard of you. Whereas at least now, even if they haven't heard of us, I can say, hey, look, here's some work that we've done before, and we kind of know how to drive those leads. And so that's becoming a much more scalable, again, way for us to drive awareness of our business within.
That's fair. Yeah. Matt, for any other startup founder that is listening to this, you've spoken about your ambassador program a few times. What is the one thing that any other startup founder should not do when it comes to building their own ambassador program?
Uh, so I think it's a good question. I think the as I say, I'm a big advocate for them. I think they work really well in sort of B2B sales. I think the key is making sure that incentive structure works well,
Sure,
and setting expectations with those individuals about what it is that they're doing and what you expect to get from it. And I think sometimes it can go wrong if you're trying to set this up where the other thing is that you end up just spending a huge amount of time. So I think thinking about how you structure it, and we've actually now got an individual whose sole role it is to kind of manage these sort of third party relationships, because you can end up spending huge amounts of time managing these people, and some of them, they're all great people generally, but they can be quite high maintenance, right?
sure.
They want, they constantly want sort of check-ins. They want, they want to see how, and a lot of it's from a good place, right? They're trying to help, but it can suddenly get to a point where you end up building this sort of network of well-intentioned people that want to help you, but they're taking up a huge amount of your time, but they're not actually driving value for you. So I think you need to set both expectations and also metrics around,
Yeah,
and just be really honest with people to say, look, our sort of expectation here, if you can get us 2 leads within the next 6 months, whatever it's going to be, and one of those comes through to a meaningful deal, that's great. But if that doesn't happen, then set the expectation to start with that maybe this isn't working, and we can part ways and stay in touch, type of thing. Because otherwise, I've had this situation before where you've got these sort of large group of people that, again, super well intentioned, and I think it's really, especially in the early days of a startup, you get to meet some of these people who are very influential and have important titles or previously had important titles. It's very easy to think that, oh, this is going to be the kind of golden goose that's going to solve my kind of
yeah,
business development problems, and they can introduce me to everybody in the industry, and we'll be fine. And then the reality is that for whatever reason, sometimes those people don't come through, or actually they're perhaps not quite as well connected or respected as you perhaps anticipated, or their connections are somewhat out of date. We've had a few people where they were the kind of bee's knees back in the sort of early 2000s, but realistically, a lot of their connections are outdated, and so their ability to actually affect value for us is limited. So I think it's just knowing when to cut ties in a polite way,
yeah.
so you're not ending up spending a huge amount of your time and effort managing people that aren't generating value for the business.
That's for sure. Matt, as startup founders, we get thrown advice from different levels, from family, from friends, from partners, from VCs, from everybody. What's the one biggest piece of BS advice that you've gotten?
I can't. I actually struggling to think of the one single bit. I've had a lot out of BS advice, and I tell you the one bit, which again this was relatively early. It was in the sort of 2019 when uMed was first getting going. There was that really strong push for everything. Everything in the world was going to be blockchain driven, and I got a lot of people telling me that if we don't build uMed on the blockchain, all health record data is going to be managed on the blockchain, and genuinely pushed from lots of different, people, investors, advisors, saying, Matt, you really need to think about this. If you don't get on this, you're going to miss the boat. And it's very easy to listen to that. And at the time, there was so much hype that you feel yourself doubting yourself. And in my head, I was like, I don't understand why this could ever help me. I don't understand why putting uMed on the blockchain, as was the kind of phrase, would actually help my business, help my customers, help anybody. But eventually you kind of keep doubting yourself, and you've got these really influential people telling you, like, Matt, you really need to think about this. I'm like, I don't get it. So I think one of the biggest things that I found hard as being a founder is knowing when to listen and when to trust your own beliefs and gut instincts, because I am wrong sometimes, and you do need to listen. And if I've met, and we've all seen those kind of founders that are incredibly single-minded, and unless you're a savant and happen to have all of the answers to everything, you're going to get stuff wrong, and you need to listen to people that know better than you about the industry and about business. But there are also times when you kind of have to trust your vision and your guts, and I think that's genuinely one of the hardest things to do. The other one is like the amount of people that give you advice on pitching to VCs, pitching to customers. Everybody's got an opinion about it, about how the elevator pitch should be, how you're, right down to the individual words that you're using. And it can be incredibly overwhelming because, again, some of these people are sort of, senior pharma people or investors. And you end up spending like days, if not weeks, of your time in your own head thinking about how you're pitching this. And ultimately, I think you need to do that. It's important to a point. But then ultimately, I think you just need to ultimately take in that advice and then decide, this is what I want to communicate. It might not be perfect from your perspective, but I think this is how I'm going to kind of deliver this. That wasn't one specific thing. I think the blockchain thing was, and I worry the same thing is happening around AI now as well. Interestingly, I think there's a huge amount of pressure for every company to have AI in their tagline, because those are the companies that are getting funded, and that's having an impact on even customers, big pharma customers. There's a strong trickle down impact where their CEO of GlaxoSmithKline or whoever it is going to be is getting pressure. How are you adopting AI? What's GSK? And that trickles down to us, where they're like, well, how are you using AI? Like, well, we are, and we are integrated, but there's a big difference between just putting your tagline, and I do know companies in our space that are AI companies, and they're just putting, protocols into ChatGPT and pretending that they have an AI product. So and for me, there's a strong sort of ethical component to this. Like, what we're dealing with is, in our spaces, patients' lives. There's the drugs that are being developed and the therapies that are being developed are ultimately going to be used on real patients, and hopefully will have real benefit. If we don't have the integrity to tell people how we're actually doing this, that really worries me. But I do worry that there's a huge pressure on founders at the moment to change their whole sort of business model, which may be appropriate, right? I think there are some companies out there that absolutely will benefit from a massive pivot towards utilization of AI. But I think there's others which perhaps don't. And I think there's a huge risk that, if we'd have tried to build uMed on the blockchain when we first started, I definitely wouldn't be having this conversation now. Yeah. So.
Awesome. Well, Matt, so selfishly, I have learned so much from you today.
No,
thank you so much for giving me some time, Matt. I'd love to learn, how can folks keep up with you? How can folks keep up with uMed?
Yeah, that's great. So, I obviously take a look at our website, umed.io. We are trying to do much better at pushing out regular content now through our LinkedIn channel. So please do follow us on LinkedIn, and you'll get a good sense of the work that we're doing. And please do reach out if there's anything that I could do to support the rest of your followership.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much, Matt. Once again, this was amazing.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Pratik.